Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the OnTrac podcast, presented live to you on YouTube, Twitter, and coming to you later via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else that you get your podcasts. Of course, OnTrac is brought to you by Origin Trail, and this is the show where we bring you all the latest and juiciest developments from the Origin Trail ecosystem and the verifiable internet for artificial intelligence that the Origin Trail technology is crucially enabling. Now, this month we have a very special episode, an industry special, one might even say, as is in the title of the episode, where we will be focusing on AI, the verifiable internet, the global supply chain, and the future of international trade. And for this very special episode, we will be joined, or we are being joined by three very special guests. And that would be David Fairney, who is a principal consultant for supply chain risk management and resilience at the British Standards Institution. Ken Lyon, the managing director of Virtual Partners and the former vice president of information services at UPS. And Trace Labs' very own Yuri Skonik, who serves as general manager and helps lead the deployment of Origin Trail solutions worldwide. Together, we'll be exploring the potential and reality, I guess, of AI solutions and global supply chains, how decentralizing these AI solutions can make them even more powerful and even more trustworthy. And we'll also be exploring the importance of choice and customization in AI models and how Origin Trail's paranets and Initial Paranet Offerings make all of this possible. So to kick things off, I'm not sure if everybody who's watching this is familiar with all of our guests. It's not our usual guest for this podcast. So why don't we just go around, starting with David, then we can go to Ken and then Yuri. If you can just introduce yourselves again, share a little bit about your background and maybe what your area of expertise and knowledge is when it comes to supply chain, or in the case of Yuri, for Origin Trail.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jonathan. And first and foremost, thank you very much for the kind invitation to the podcast. I work for an organization called BSI, British Standards Institute, who are the national standards body for the United Kingdom. I specialize in supply chain, risk management, security, and resilience. So I support organizations in a consultative capacity to manage risk within their supply chains. My background, how I've sort of built out into this expertise. I spent a lot of time in the military, transitioned into a commercial world, taking a lot of skill sets around security into the commercial world, working for large corporations. From a technology point of view, I had some responsibility in my past life for port security. So very interested in terminal operating systems, security technologies to protect port, migrating into really interesting stuff like container scanning for radiation and x-rays to check what was in the box. That was immediately post 9/11. And sort of migrated a real interest and developed a real interest into the application of technologies to provide solutions to manage risk within the supply chain. And in terms of AI and my relationship with Origin Trail, we were first introduced where I needed a solution for an issue with a client in India where there was some threat of diversion of pharmaceutical products that once it had arrived in country, and it had a large network of distribution. And we worked with that particular client, myself and Yuri and the guys from Origin Trail and Trace Labs, to provide them a solution that allowed them to give greater visibility within the supply chain network to prevent diversion. But actually, the solution that we came up with was absolutely mind-blowing in terms of giving not just visibility, but the ability to then be able to measure that information that was collected, that data that was being collected, to be able to make really interesting and positive decisions by the client. So, a very quick potted history of myself and how I know the guys at Origin Trail. But thanks again for having me on today.
It's our pleasure. How about you, Ken?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I've been involved in shipping, logistics, supply chain management, and the technology that supports a lot of that. Started back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. So that kind of dates me, which is pretty prehistoric. These days, I'm managing director of a company called Virtual Partners, which is my company. I set that up with another person, and primarily this is just a vehicle for me to go and stick my nose in and share my expertise where it's helpful, useful, or to rehash a lot of the mistakes I've made, which are many and varied. From the period up until I started this, I've been involved in software startups. I spent 10 years at UPS. Firstly as part of the European management team, and then part of a small team that set up an outfit called UPS Worldwide Logistics, which is now more widely known as UPS Supply Chain Solutions. And we designed that and developed it as what's called a fourth party logistics company, which was actually involved in designing and then establishing and operating many global supply chains. So rather than just trucks and sheds, as they say in the game, it was essentially being able to design how very large supply chains, such as automotive supply chains, computer manufacturing supply chains, fast-moving consumer goods, designing their supply chains and then establishing them and then operating them. And obviously that involved a huge amount of technology. And I was very lucky to be able to set up a bunch of teams around the world that were much, much smarter than me to design, sometimes very innovatively, solutions that managed those supply chains. So as you can imagine, I've seen a lot of things that can go wrong in supply chains, not all of them self-inflicted. And understanding what happens within a supply chain has been a passion of mine for probably getting on 30 years now. And it's been very, very hard to be able to do that. And as technology has improved, it's got easier, but it's still challenging. And I was introduced to Origin Trail back in 2017 by a mutual friend who said, these guys are thinking about some solutions in that area. And I was dumbfounded to discover that they'd drawn similar conclusions to me without anything like my level of experience, as to why it's very, very difficult to manage and establish information systems to manage global supply chains. And I got very interested in the team, what they were doing and their approach. And essentially we've been involved in sharing experiences since then, hence why I'm here. So yeah, hopefully it's going to be a very interesting conversation and discussion today with David and Yuri.
Yeah, I think it will be. I mean, I wrote the questions, so I hope that they will be interesting to everybody who's watching at home and everybody who's on this call. Yuri, why don't you, I mean, you're more of a familiar face probably to some people in the Origin Trail community or have attended, watched more of these events, but why don't you introduce yourself again and give a quick recap of what your role is, what you do in the Origin Trail ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I'm sure the discussion will be great, but just I won't spend too much time on my introduction. But yes, I'm the general manager at Trace Labs. As part of my let's say role, what I do is also spend a lot of time with, as David already mentioned, also with BSI and other enterprise partners, actually deploying solutions that are built on top of Origin Trail using trusted AI. And we've had a very, let's say, very fun ride in the past. It's going to be now, I think, 5 years since I've been in my role. And I've had some experience in supply chains before as well. I spent 5 years at DHL, which doesn't really amount to much compared to the other two guests. So I will leave the supply chain expertise on their plate, and I'll chime in where I can. But I do spend a lot of my time kind of at that intersection of Origin Trail technology, artificial intelligence, and then enterprise solutions. So it's a really interesting and fast developing field but I think we're only scratching the surface. So I'm really excited to see what the conversation and discussion today brings.
Yes, and thank you for sharing all that and reintroducing yourself. So this is kind of to just jump right into things. This is a very interesting time, I think, to be having this conversation, because for a long time, supply chain and blockchain was kind of posited as sort of the killer app that might bring mainstream blockchain adoption. Origin Trail was a pioneer in that early on. And now, kind of the big narrative, and Origin Trail obviously still works in the supply chain space, having this call, for example. Um, but one of the big narratives now, of course, is AI. And once again, Origin Trail is finding itself as a pioneer in the AI space. And so it's interesting that these two narratives now are kind of weaving together in a way that perhaps when I imagine this project first launched, maybe people weren't even thinking would be a reality or a possibility. So what are some of the ways that, maybe this is for Ken and David, what are some of the ways that you see AI being implemented now in supply chains? Are people coming up with any innovative ideas, creative ideas for implementing AI into supply chains?
Yeah, I'll go first if you don't mind, Jonathan, if that's okay, Ken. Actually, there is a lot of applications of AI in supply chains in terms of fleet management, in terms of inventory management, risk management, indeed. But I would suggest that they're pretty much siloed to organizations. So internally with organizations, and the challenge is obviously sharing information in a trusted manner. So there's lots of applications out there just now in terms of or adoption of AI, and many organizations are actually saying, yep, we're embracing AI, but not a lot of detail to it. From my personal experience working with Origin Trail and Trace Labs on a number of projects, what I see evolving is very much, okay, blockchain based, decentralized knowledge graph, which is extremely powerful in terms of searching, and then the AI on top of that. That is a solution in its own right, and a very, very efficient solution for a number of different functions across the supply chain, whether it's operations, whether it's security, whether it's you want to optimize your supply chain. But again, it's sort of focused on one organization. But with the introduction of, and I know that we're going to talk about it in terms of the DRAGs, and that then allows us to expand out and take information from out with an organization in a shared capacity and a controlled and trusted capacity, which then, of course, just it magnifies it exponentially in terms of the ability of what AI can give you. So yeah, it's there. I mean, I was last night looking in the freezer for trying to feed the kids, and my wife was working, and I'm scratching my head thinking, well, what can I make them? So, I used my smart device. I switched on an AI device. It took a picture of what was in my freezer, freezer, and it gave me multiple suggestions around potential meals to feed my children nutritiously. Now, I see that as an example of, I'm walking around a warehouse and I've got to fulfill an order for an organization. I could use that same AI type technology in the supply chain to walk around and make that decision in the most efficient and optimized manner to fulfill an order from an organization, as opposed to what currently happens is, SAP, print off, big spreadsheet, person walking around the massive warehouse trying to find exactly where it is and what's to be filled and fulfilled. So tremendous application, and really, really, really exciting how things are evolving in the supply chain in the context of AI.
Anything you wanted to add to that, Ken?
Yeah. I would echo exactly what David has said. There's been instances of machine learning visible across different organizations and supply chains for a while. For example, vision systems that you get in some warehouses that enable make intelligent choices, or can flag up where something is damaged because the pattern recognition and vision systems identifies that. You can identify through these systems if something's not where it should be. So there's a variety of things, safety monitoring. But these have been around for a while, and my former employer, UPS, many years ago, they recently introduced a thing called Orion, which intelligently routes, based on real-time information, intelligently routes their deliveries for the parcel delivery business. Now, at the scale at which they operate, which is millions of items every day, that makes a huge difference. And it's probably worth at this point pointing out that people hear the phrase supply chains, or supply chain, and not many people understand what that is. They think they know, but essentially a supply chain is not linear. It's actually a network of companies, sometimes tens of thousands of companies in the larger supply chains. So trying to coordinate information flows across that with the variety of different systems that are employed in different organizations is very, very challenging. And the people that operate these supply chains have to make lots of decisions many, many times during the day, particularly as supply chains of basically have to react to what's going on in the world. So you need agility and adaptability. And artificial intelligence systems, in some cases, are already providing support for that decision making, but going forward will essentially be the voice in the ear of a supply chain manager or an operator saying, okay, don't do this, do that. Or yes, I agree, that's the right thing to do. Only they can do it much, much faster. But the decentralized nature, which essentially what Origin Trail specializes in, the decentralized nature of their solution set, is ideal for when you've got a hugely distributed operation, which is what a supply chain usually is, particularly a large one, with all these different entities, different systems, all trying to work out something for themselves, but understanding that the power is really in the collaboration of that. And to be able to do it in a transparent and trusted way is absolutely vital. So that's kind of where all this starts to come together and get really interesting.
So,
Jonathan, if I could just add on to Ken's point there, it is very complex out there with multiple different suppliers feeding into any organization's supply chain. But again, looking to the future, how I see this really, really benefiting, and it's not that far off, because again, working with Origin Trail and TraceLabs, working on a number of different solutions, I can see one organization, and typically in an organization in relation to a supply chain, you will have, your supply chain experts, you'll have operational people that will be interested in the supply chain, you'll have your risk management people, your compliance people, the legal part of the business, all interested in supply chain. And you have all these suppliers in your network. And currently they'll have multiple different systems managing those suppliers in whatever functional context they have to, whether it's procurement, operations, supply chain, transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So we're working on a risk management specifically solution. We're gathering data that is relevant to all of those different functions. So if you can imagine having one single system that has, to Ken's point, the agility and the ability to be able to, any function within the organization can ask information related to the data that has, whether I'm a risk manager understanding. So we've got a disruption in Turkey. There is, there's an earthquake in Turkey. Its impact, right? How many facilities or suppliers does that impact my business? And it tells me I've got 5 suppliers in that country, right? How many of those suppliers are directly impacted from the center of the earthquake? 2. Okay, the other 3. Reorganize my supply chain from those suppliers into Eastern, and different functions are asking information of the same question for the first time, and having that information to hand to be able to make decisions. So that's where this is evolving to, which is it's exciting, but it's really is profound how it's changing or can change.
Mm-hmm. So when you think about using AI in supply chains, first of all, let me say that was all very informative, because I will admit that I myself, like, obviously I know that things are incredibly complex, but when I think about a supply chain, I also think about, okay, let's say the wood was cut down from this tree here, and then it moved on a truck here, and then it ended up there. And I do think of it like very linearly, instead of like the vast spider's web that I'm sure a supply chain actually is. So thank you very much for outlining that to me and to everybody who's listening. So when I think about using AI in supply chains, and I think about using AI just in everyday life, AI still is not perfect and by any means. I mean, it's getting better and better, and you think about AI today being the absolute worst it's ever going to be, right? So there's all these massive improvements it's surely going to make, but are there currently any risks in using AI in supply chains? Like, we talk about hallucination of AI, we talk about introducing bias. Do these same issues come up when you're talking about integrating the solutions into the global supply chain?
Yeah, from my point of view, absolutely. So therefore, the issue around trust and building trust into your solution is absolutely paramount. So it is a big concern. But that shouldn't, in my opinion, hinder us from sort of driving forward with identifying solutions that are going to benefit not just the supply chain, but all of us.
Yeah, I mean, AI systems, as far as I can see, that they're getting better and hallucinations are reducing. But one of the key points that Origin Trail have been pushing, certainly over the past few months, is if you have trusted and verifiable information or data, that helps inform an AI. Now, in terms of things like bias or whatever, they're always going to be there to some degree or other. However, as models evolve, and I think we're kidding ourselves if anybody on the planet at the moment can say how AI technology is going to evolve over the next year, let alone the next 5 to 10 years. Essentially, having trusted data sources to inform some kind of artificial intelligence model that can then provide suggestions, that's the best we can hope for. Hopefully it'll be much, much better. But at the moment, based on what we all know, that's really the situation. And as I mentioned just now, the velocity at which a lot of supply chains operate, because really that's all I can talk about, is in some cases increasing, in other cases it's slowing down. But this variability requires information to be delivered very swiftly and information that you can trust. And that's really difficult if you're dealing with a supply chain that's globally extended, and you're having to suddenly establish a relationship with a partner that you know nothing about. If you have a mechanism such as proposed by the Origin Trail technology, then you can have a fair degree of confidence that anything you want to set up with that supplier is probably going to work. Whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was a nightmare to set that up. It took ages and you lost lots of opportunity to do that. Technology is now providing the ability to do some of this, but there's always the chance that it can go wrong or an AI goes rogue or whatever. We just don't know, or certainly this person here doesn't really know enough to give a definitive answer on that. I'm just trying to outline some of the issues that you need to think about, and that's where blockchain and tokenized technologies provide a mechanism to do this in a trusted and verifiable way. And that's why Ethereum has got such utility in providing for this. And hopefully these technologies, these fundamental technologies, are going to keep improving to support this kind of activity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I can add a sentence or two on that one, because all very, very good points. And I think there's no silver bullet, right, to solving, let's say, the supply chain issues that we're facing. It's always a combination of things. And while AI is definitely one of those technologies, it cannot operate on its own, right? I like to think of AI as models, especially when we're talking about them, as very good, as very smart brains, right? That can help make deductions, they can help conclude things, they can help do analysis, automate things, right? When we're talking about AI agents, I think we're going to talk about this later down. Even do things, like for you instead of kind of really doing person-like things. But in order for that to be valuable, in order that to work, you do need a solid and trusted foundation of knowledge that the AI, and that goes for all of the AI models, right, can access and use. And if we're talking about what David mentioned before, if we're talking about organizations using these AI in silos, right, and then we're talking about there are sometimes tens of thousands of players, then you can see that even if everything goes golden, you are actually optimizing 1 out of 10,000 nodes in a supply chain, which means you're doing some local optimization, but you're not really achieving impact on a supply chain scale. And I think that's where this combination of also all of these technologies, so Origin Trail, which already combines blockchains and knowledge graphs, which are, by the way, a branch of AI. They're a symbolic branch of AI. With this new neural branch of AI, you can really get a good impact because you get the best of both worlds, and you get connected data that you need to be able to get the best of both worlds, right? So you can connect and verify data across hundreds of thousands of organizations, and that's, I think, the direction that we need to move to.
Well, why don't we keep you in the hot seat for a minute, Yuri? So how exactly does Origin Trail make sure that the data, let me rephrase that question. Where does the Origin Trail technology fit in to all of this to ensure this trusted data foundation? Like, I know that Origin Trail has this decentralized retrieval augmented generation, which we went into pretty in depth in the last episode. So if you did not watch that episode and you're watching this one, I highly recommend that you go back to episode 3, I believe it is, and listen to that to get the full, very long and detailed version. But I guess to summarize in brief, what exactly is decentralized retrieval augmented generation, and why does it help build this trusted foundation that we've been all speaking about?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I think so. I wouldn't go into super much of details. Like you mentioned, there is a previous episode on that, but it's the decentralized retrieval augmented generation is a kind of like a core component, core principle, or a framework that you use in the Origin Trail decentralized knowledge graph. And what it does essentially is if you think of AI as a very smart person, let's say, that you have in the context of supply chain. You have a guy sitting right there next to you. He's studied everything in the world, everything possible. But if you then ask him something about, where is how risky is this shipment for me to send this shipment on this route? It would be able to answer some things, right? It probably wouldn't be able to answer everything because it doesn't have access to real-time information, doesn't have access to connected data about your supply chain to know these things. And there is a technique that enables essentially these shortcomings to be addressed. It's called retrieval augmented generation. It's like giving this person a book with all of the knowledge that is needed for him to answer this question, and that is then like feeding essentially data to relevant data as context to the AI model that is able to then provide an answer based on that input, right? And that's retrieval augmented generation. Now, how the decentralized retrieval augmented generation, which is a step up of that model, enhances this is really organizing all of this knowledge in the decentralized knowledge graph. So not only a single organization, right, means you have connected data across multiple organizations in a supply chain, which means it's like giving that person a book, not only just a random book, but a book of that has a very clear way of having a what do you call it, table of contents. It has a very clear way of verifying where each part of that book, or even several books or hundreds of books, came from. And because it's AI, right, it's not a person, can do this very quickly. So it's essentially in 2 sentences as a wrap up, right? So it enables AI to access data on the decentralized knowledge graph from multiple organizations related or connected in a supply chain. It provides, when the AI provides an answer, it also provides a way to verify where those answers came from, right? Because different knowledge will be issued by different organizations. So you have that verifiability, and you have knowledge ownership related to that as well. So every piece of knowledge is verifiably owned by somebody. And it gives you a lot more precise way of actually extracting the data that you need to answer a question, because it uses knowledge graphs, it uses advanced retrieval extraction, so extraction methods for knowledge. You can do a lot more than just in, let's say, plain or normal, let's call it, retrieval augmented generation. So you have all of these benefits, right, that really, in this case, when we're talking about supply chain, really kind of connect with everything, because you need connectivity, you need verifiability, but you still want the convenience, right, of being able to ask an AI to do something, and maybe not just answer a question, right? Very soon, we're talking about AI agents performing tasks that are related to not just answering a question, but actually performing something, right? So handling the customs documentation process from beginning to end based on your internal and supply chain partner data. That's not really a dream scenario anymore. This is, I think, coming very, very quickly. But in order to do that, you need that trusted knowledge infrastructure. And I think that's where Origin Trail plays that crucial role.
Do you have an example of like what this decentralized retrieval augmented generation or Origin Trail working with supply chains looks like in the real world? Like, I know you recently unveiled this, that you were working with a chicken producer where you can talk to the chickens that you're about to eat and figure out like what their lives were like and if they lived a happy life. I'm being a bit facetious, but does that rely then on this process that you've been speaking on?
Absolutely, and it's a very clear, clean example, because it's easy to, it's a consumer application, so it's very easy to understand. So me as a consumer, when I, for example, scan the meat product that I bought, or even just go on the Perutnina Ptuj, so that's the poultry manufacturer's website, I can simply ask, where does this particular batch of meat comes from? And what happens in the back, that is the decentralized retrieval augmented generation, is that with the help of AI, we identify the parts of the Perutnina's knowledge graph, right, that contain the answer to the question. So in this case, where is that particular batch coming from? So there will be a query generated by AI. So we use AI on the helping extract the knowledge, plus then helping summarize the knowledge through several steps. I wouldn't go into that. And find the farm, for example, where the chicken is coming from. And then it will return that answer to the generative AI model. It will form a nice reply to the user, and that's what the user will see. And that's one, let's say, very simple example. We have another very cool example that, for example, is with the Swiss Railways SVB, which is very, I'd say, very powerful, because it concerns transportation safety, right? So they, for example, can ask questions like, where was or who was welding this last rail track, for example, and what were the conditions, and when was it last welded? Which ones are likely to break? And the same thing happens in the back, right? So you have the decentralized RAG that finds the appropriate pieces of information in the graph that is formed from so Swiss Railways plus their suppliers' knowledge, all connected, right? All verifiable, and you get the answer. You said these are likely to break, or these were welded last time here, and here, all through a very simple, human. Anybody can come and ask, and that's the real power of the decentralized RAG, is that it can be used in very simple terms, but it can also handle extremely advanced and complex use cases, which I think is the exciting part of where we're going with AI in international trade and supply chains overall.
I think, Yuri, sorry, Jonathan, I think there's another great example where we've worked with not just Origin Trail and ourselves, but a whole consortia of companies to address a challenge in the UK at the UK borders which is directly related to supply chain, obviously, where we undertook a couple of pilot projects of moving fruit from Spain through France across the channel into the UK and delivery to the UK. But the objective of the pilot was for us to build a solution that would allow us to visualize and obviously present risk and compliance data. So how exposed to food fraud, to disruption during transportation, to spoilage during transportation, to illegal migrants entering the container as it transported through the supply chain. So collecting that data from live as the fruit moves through the supply chain, but present the information in with a risk algorithm, appropriate risk algorithm, in a user interface for UK customs, for example, or the DEFRA food agency in the UK. And again, that is all built around the same construct. So blockchain, decentralized knowledge graph, quite a complex supply chain, and a user interface. So I think that's another excellent example of,
Yeah, and I think there, David, it's a very good point you bring up. We also did a showcase a while ago of how that also works with AI, right? So you being able to
absolutely. So just for the benefit of the audience, so me as a user, I could ask the AI user interface, for example, tell me container number, whatever it is, 1,283, for example. Show me its journey, and it would immediately sort of pull up the map. It would identify the stops that I'd taken. It would identify details around the sensors that were on the container or the sensors that were on the truck, and then I could sort of drill down and chat with that information. So as a user, a risk management user, I would be really interested in being able to do that. That was a very powerful use of AI.
So to bring Ken back in, we were chatting a little bit before this episode, and you were saying that supply chains are full of bad data and bad information. Can you explain what you meant by that, and then how that impacts the supply chains when it is full of bad information and bad data?
Yeah, this is it's not quite so bad now as it used to be, but I suspect that there's still lots of holes. Essentially, everything that moves through a supply chain up until information systems became generally affordable to cover every aspect of an operation. It was all done using paper, and people copied stuff. Even now, there's a huge amount of spreadsheets that drive or at least inform what goes on in a supply chain. And people make mistakes when they're keying stuff in. And ideally, what you'd like is information captured at source and then passes through a supply chain operation or operations, and either gets augmented or collated with other data. But as long as the source data is fine, then you don't have a problem. Interesting. Let me give you an example. This is probably going to upset loads of people, but that's usually what I do. In terms of shipping manifests, very obscure. Most people think, they don't use manifests still, do they? Well, they do. If you take an average size container ship these days, particularly on the Asia to Europe trades, these are pretty big ships. So let me tell you what I mean by a big ship. A reasonable size ship has something like 20,000 containers on it. They're called TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units. These are the sort of the short boxes that you see on back of trailers and stuff going along the highways, freeways, and being delivered into factories. The larger size ones are 40 foot. They're double the size, so like two stuck end to end. So the average the average size container ship now on the Asia-Europe trades is 20,000 TEU ship. Some of the bigger ones, several thousand, can carry several thousand more than that. Now, if one of those, if a vessel develops a problem, so there's a fire on board in one of the containers, now you would think that the port authorities, because they get these manifests transmitted between themselves, so when a vessel's coming in, the container bay plan and all the information about the manifest gets sent electronically, so they would know what's on there. So they get that, but they don't trust it. So instead of just saying, okay, container number, whatever the container number is, and it's bay 4 and it's 5 down, and these are the containers immediately adjacent to it, so we can see, is it going to explode, is it not, or whatever. They don't trust any of that, so they send out the fire services, the radioactive, the sort of hazardous specialist services for radiochemical, radioactive, and all that kind of stuff. Port health, basically everyone who could conceivably involved in this rocks up just in case someone misdeclared stuff. Now, actually, people, bad actors, as they're known in the trade, do misdeclare deliberately stuff. That's why smuggling happens. And as David mentioned right at the start of this, governments and countries around the world and port authorities, because container trade is so vast, can only monitor and measure and check a tiny percentage of the containers that go through them. And the bad actors know this. So they'll either lie or provide bad data by lying. And this is the kind of game that the customs authorities and the criminal agencies are looking to try and use technology to sort of sift through all this data, look for points of collation to identify anomalies that enables them to spot what's going on. Now, a more practical implementation of this, if that's not practical enough, the Ever Given, when that took a sharp right turn going through the Suez a couple of years ago and embedded itself firmly in the bank, took a fair amount of time to dig itself out, but two, a lot of people were scurrying around trying to work out exactly what was on board based on the manifest data, who needed to be informed, and were there any particular cargoes on there that were time limited, chilled cargo, for example, any other stuff, if there's pharmaceuticals on there that maybe weren't immediately in problems, but if they were allowed to cook because the refrigerated containers they were in heated up too much, as with foodstuffs, what would the problems be? This took a huge amount of time because although a lot of the information was available electronically, trying to collate all that and cross-check it and that was very, very difficult. And then the risk parties got involved, the insurance companies. What was their liability? Because a ship with 20-odd thousand containers on it, the value of the cargo plus the value of the hull is getting close on $1.5 to $2 billion on average. So that concentration of risk in something like that is absolutely enormous and has huge financial implications. Now, let's imagine that a few years' time, an origin trail type construct is available to the operators of that and the port authorities. They would know within a couple of minutes everything that's on that vessel. It would be verified, so they could trust the data. They could automatically start informing the people that needed to be informed about the delays to their cargo and various other things. And therefore a lot less heartache and clarity as to the real financial risk and the liabilities would be available to everyone very, very quickly. So that's a kind of a practical example and how you can apply technology and this technology that we're talking about to improve things. Sorry, that was a bit of a random speech, but anyway, that's...
I think, Ken, sorry, Jonathan, I think that's a really, really important point, and it sort of adds to the direction of travel. Just to add to Jonathan's practical application there, to give some people some context, there's 800 million container movements globally. In the UK, that accounts for 1.2 trillion pounds of trade annually. The UK has the largest insurance market in terms of supply chain and marine transportation. And every year, billions and billions of paper documents are generated to associate with those container shipments. Hence the reason why the UK government has enacted a new act called the Electronic Trade Data or Trade Document Act in 2023, where it is driving towards the obviously transposing paper into data for a number of different benefits. But just to put some context around that whole issue, it's just mind-blowing to imagine that if you're shipping a container from China to the United States, for example, that there is paper that moves with that particular container. Every container, paper manifests all the way through the supply chain, all the way through the journey, to make sure that people are paid, to make sure that the insurance is covered, to make sure that the responsibilities are accounted for, all of that. And it's all still done manually. So just in terms of efficiency savings to move to that is tremendous. But moreover, if you imagine there are billions and billions of paper transactions, well, can you imagine billions and billions of knowledge assets that are lodged on or held in the Origin Trail decentralized knowledge graph? That's where what we're trying to achieve, and that's where we're trying to go as an industry.
I think maybe one sentence from my side. That's a great point, David. I think when we talk about supply chains, the insurance and reinsurance angles are very often overlooked, and I think this is it's really interesting exploring that potential, because once you have billions and billions of knowledge assets, right, where you can very simply, as an insurance provider, ask about, what happened to a certain container with verifiability. The reduction in cost and optimization potential for the industry is enormous, right? And I think we don't talk about it as often as we should, because that's a huge part of the supply chain, global supply chains, is the insurance and reinsurance industry.
But even just, sorry, Yuri, just on that point, not just the insurance, reinsurance, but the actual payment of all the different stakeholders in the supply chain that are directly related to that manifest, no invoice sent, all the way through the supply chain. The inefficiencies are back to Ken's point, there's a lot of manual process still in the system, huge amount.
So obviously there's a need for the sort of trusted, verifiable internet, verifiable backbone that can be used for supply chains. We discussed DRAG and how that can help enhance the verifiability and trustworthiness of data. But another solution that Origin Trail has come up with is this thing called a paranet, which sits kind of on top of the decentralized knowledge graph. Well, that's probably a terrible way to explain it, so I'll let Yuri explain it better. So we went into this also quite in depth last episode. So again, I'm going to encourage everybody to go back and listen to episode 3 if you want a really, really, really in-depth explanation of this. But throwing it back to Yuri, can you walk us through a high-level overview, remind us what is a paranet, what is this thing you've developed called an initial paranet offering, not to be confused with the traditional financial IPO, initial public offering. This is an initial paranet offering. So what is this, and what does it do? Why is it important? Why does it help increase the verifiability and reliability of data and information in supply chains?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I think that's it's a very important kind of notion to understand, and I think we can explain it in a relatively small period of time, because you were almost right in the explanation. So it's the paranets are not sitting on top of the Origin Trail decentralized knowledge graph. Paranets are simply collections of knowledge assets, which are the building blocks where the knowledge is contained, that are organized around a specific topic. Or, for example, in this case, when we're talking about supply chains, it could be that they're organized around a specific organization or group more likely group of organizations that cooperate or collaborate in a supply chain. And they are kind of autonomous units in a sense that they are self-contained in a sense. They have their own way of being structured, what ontologies you want to use, what data structures you want to have for you to be able to use that connected knowledge to the best of, or to deliver the most value. They have specific AI services that might be specific, generic, but might be very specific to the way that particular paranet works. And then you have a collection of paranets, right, that composes the entire decentralized knowledge graph. And I think the important thing here to understand is that paranet doesn't necessarily operate in isolation, right? You can have then also DRAG services that look into 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 100 paranets at the same time, but they will all have specific ways, right, of how to best extract the knowledge that you need from them. And there are two ways where then the initial paranet offerings come in. There are two ways to create a paranet. One way to create a paranet is simply register a paranet, and that's when you're building, for example, that supply chain knowledge bank with your partners. If we're focusing now on the supply chain and trusted or in an international trade angle. So to build that knowledge bank of connected knowledge that you can then use for different products that all sit in, that all use the AI services. And the other way, which you mentioned before, is the IPO. And IPOs are very interesting in the sense of the initial Paranet offerings, because they are an incentivized way to create a Paranet. So what happens is that you and I'm going to give an example here for related to global supply chains and international trade, and I'm sure David and Ken have a lot of ideas on what those paranets could look like. But imagine you have your own paranet, you have data on the supply chains from multiple partners in your partner network, and you want to add something. Let's say you're looking for some very specific local truck rates across several countries in Europe, and the only way to do this is for someone to go there and submit quotes and get those rates and whatnot. And this is just a very banal example. You could say, okay, I'm submitting this Paranet via an IPO. I need this in trucking rate data. I need it in using this and this ontology, meaning it needs to be in this form. And I will provide certain AI services to help produce and consume this knowledge once it's available. And there will be an incentive reward structure for people who then mine this knowledge, provide this knowledge into the Paranet. They will be rewarded with the Neuro token. So that's then the IPO. And then you can have a Paranet. You have these two Paranets as a consortium or as an organization that you can use with DRAG when you're building different types of solutions, either consumer or B2B. And you can build multiples of these Paranets. And things that pop to mind are, crowdsourced ones, are weather data, sustainability impacts that might require certain specific types of ontologies and data collection. So a lot of very exciting ways to kind of connect these Paranets that are, let's say, supply chain network specific to something that is more, let's say, industry specific, that might be used by your supply chain network, maybe for someone else's supply chain network. And there's a whole bunch of, let's say, extensions to this topic that I will not go into at the moment. I'm sure David and Ken have some comments around that one too.
No, I was just visualizing it there just now. I'm a procurement officer in an organization, and I've been tasked to identify the most sustainable and cost-effective transportation company, and being able to, there's a Paranet there that looks at transportation costs. There's a Paranet that looks around sustainability in different organizations, and being able to sort of link into that through an AI model to ask the question and get an answer as quickly, because that's a huge amount of work, manually, if you like. So, but there's multiple different examples I can think of where this structure would benefit, organizations and supply chains without a doubt.
Yeah, an example that springs to mind for me. So as I tend to be the gloomy, miserable one, I tend to specialize in disaster. There were dreadful floods in Thailand a few years ago, several years ago. I think it was about 10 years ago, something like that. What turned out to be a big surprise was that computer manufacturers at the time were using disk drives, like physical drives that spun round. And it turned out most of the manufacturing facilities for these disk drives were in various companies, and they were all clustered in Thailand, where all the floods were. So all of a sudden, everybody realized they all had the same problem. Now, in the construct of something like Paranet, the disk drive or the equivalent manufacturing gang could agree to establish a Paranet on which they share information about available capacity. Now, a lot of this stuff is commercially sensitive, so there needs to be, by definition, these organizations are very suspicious about what information they share and when they share it. But when there is some kind of catastrophe, either caused by the climate or war or whatever, the disk drive gang, wherever their facilities are around the world, can decide to submit information into the Paranet to say, we have this manufacturing capacity available for these kinds of components, units that you require, and who's interested. And if you are, then there's a mechanism whereby, using tokenization, you can understand a little more about what's available, and therefore we're open to bids as to who's interested in it. So that kind of real-time, it's almost market making, but as an offshoot of physical operations that carry on anyway unless they're disrupted, is a very interesting ingredient in procurement and manufacturing that these kinds of technologies can now enable, whereas before they couldn't. Sure, you could share database information, but the challenges of trying to integrate that information, or at least collate it in context, is fiendishly complex. I know this because I've done it. And trying to do this on a global basis is very, very challenging, but it's now getting easier thanks to innovations and kind of lateral thinking around how you can deploy this technology and knowledge to resolve some of these issues.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you can use these paranets for, and again, Yuri, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that you can build these sort of customized, fine-tuned, and individually tailored AI solutions using the data on the decentralized knowledge graph, using the data from these paranets. So if you can explain to me and to our listeners why it's so important that we're able to sort of customize and offer this freedom of choice in these AI models, when we can just theoretically go to something like OpenAI, who can just we can plug in something to Chat GPT and give us an answer. Like, why do we need this customization, and how does these paranets make that more possible or more feasible?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Jonathan. And I think there are a couple of angles to this. And the first one that pops to mind is really having the and that's before going into this. That just what Jonathan is saying is that using Origin Trail, decentralized knowledge graph, and DRAG gives you the full flexibility to determine which AI models, so large language models or different types of model, you actually want to use in your decentralized RAG framework. And then also as related to the AI services that particular Paranet that you're using them in provides. And that's important even just from a pure privacy perspective, right? So if you look at, if you want to build a solution that is completely you have a lot of sensitive data, right, that you don't want to be sending to OpenAI every time you do an extraction, and kind of use their API to get an answer, right? You can have your self-hosted large language model on your company's infrastructure that is used as part of the AI service, and keep everything very secure in that manner. And furthermore, you can then go on and actually train or fine-tune models on specific paranet data, making them more specialized for the industry. So here we're talking about global supply chains. If we're talking about a model or a RAG direct service that would focus on, we talked about insurance and reinsurance companies, right? Let's say you would have a hosted model that you could use actually paranet data to train on identifying potential, I don't know, insurance fraud, right? So you would find these, you would use paranet data to fine-tune that model to identifying these things. It would be the same underlying data as maybe some other direct service would use, but this one would be specialized to this, and the model would be very good at extracting and then providing that data. And you can then fine-tune and use different aspects of or different models for different aspects of your solution or whatever you're building. Provide different services, but the flexibility is there to really, at the end of the day, privacy, but also generating larger impact, having better solutions, right? If you have a fine-tuned model that is able to identify from the knowledge assets and the paranets exactly parts where there's something potentially off for the insurance. Boom, you got it, right? So you can use that in a solution, and you can continue growing. As you continue growing the graph in the paranet, the more you can do this. And so it's kind of a snowball effect in terms of how much data you have access to, how well your direct solution works, and the impact that you get out of it as an industry partner, right? So I'm going to stop here. I hope I conveyed the concept well enough.
Yeah, and you touched on this a little bit in your response, but how do you, if I'm a supply chain organization of some kind or dealing with supply chains, and I want to launch one of these paranets, I'm assuming that I'm going to have a lot of confidential information. So how exactly do I ensure that the information that I am uploading to this open source, open protocol remains confidential and doesn't leak into the hands of, bad actors or whoever might want to exploit that information for nefarious purposes?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think open source is often mistaken or kind of taken to mean the same as everything is open in terms of data as well. So you can everything is public, which is also not the case, right? A lot of it should be, right? If we're crowdsourcing through IPOs, weather data or sustainability data, there is no reason that should be private necessarily, right? That should be a public paranet, which can be accessed by whichever organization wants to use it. But they could potentially combine that paranet with a paranet that they're building, which is limited in access to their supply chain partners, right? So you might have each knowledge asset, and that's the base concept is that each knowledge asset can contain data that is public, can contain data that is, let's say, permissioned in a sense that you can decide who should be able to access it, and then you have the combination, the best of both worlds. So when a DRAG service is looking for knowledge on the decentralized knowledge graph, and if you have access to certain permissioned or private knowledge assets from supply chain partners in your network, that would be part of where the DRAG framework would look at to extract data. If you don't, right? If you don't have any access to any any private data, you would be restricted more to only the public knowledge assets, right? And that's how each organization essentially that uses this might have a slightly different outcome of their direct services based on the access to knowledge assets that they have.
I think I have an example for that one, Yuri, which is really interesting. So many shipping organizations look at something that's called dwell time, Jonathan, which is, how long containers take to transit through the port organization. And some can be very quick, but some can be a long dwell time, which is obviously costly. So I know that shipping organizations and their operations groups spend a lot of time utilizing dwell time information, which is publicly available. So they're pulling that information across all the ports that they may visit, but using it to calculate commercially sensitive information around steaming speed of their ships to conserve energy, to conserve fuel, etc., etc. So that's all very private and commercially sensitive to them. However, they have all this information around dwell time, which is publicly available. Maybe they want to share that dwell time information, but keep all their sensitive and commercially sensitive information to themselves.
Yeah,
So
that's a very good point.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead, Jonathan. I just want to say, that's a very good example. Yeah.
I just have one last question for all three of you, I suppose. How far can this scale? How big can this get? Like the decentralized knowledge graph, paranets, DRAG. When it comes to supply chains, like, could we have one day a nation state with a paranet, its own paranet? Could each nation state have their own paranet? Like, when you think of 10, 20, 100 years, who knows? You think of deep into the future, and everything goes exactly as you might want it to go, and everyone's adopting these. Like, how big are we talking that this network and use cases could grow?
Yeah, Jonathan, I'll have first go at that. I think we're on our way to that in terms of nation state. There's something called single trade windows, which many nation states organizations are driving towards. It's there already in Singapore. The US are embracing the concept and driving towards it. The UK or European Union. Single trade window is related directly to all data related to trading, imports and exports. So the framework is already building. And when you talk about paranets and how big this could get, well, I see paranets and paranets below paranets and paranets below paranets all feeding up into global trade, which relates to global supply chains.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I got interested in working with Origin Trail, as I say, several years ago, was that everyone's interested in visibility in their supply chains. We want to know what's going on, and when drama happens, we want to know really, really quickly. The trouble is to try and create something that does that with technology available back then, even though it's a relatively short time ago. Everybody ended up with the idea that you have one centralized database. That doesn't work. And a lot of the big, and trust me, literally billions of dollars have been spent by various companies, a lot of technology companies, trying to resolve this problem. And their view of supply chains was that as long as you shove all the data in a centralized database, even if that database is split across various instances, it's essentially a single entity, then you've resolved the problem. It doesn't work. You can do it up to a point, but it doesn't work. And I know this from many, many, many years of experience and tears and heartache. You can get it to work in some instances in part of a supply chain. But the notion, for example, if you're Volkswagen and you say to Bosch, right, you have to submit data into our database and this is the way you have to do it. They would turn around and say, well, sorry, I know you're Volkswagen, but we actually work with Toyota and Mercedes-Benz, and they want us to do it slightly differently. So, that's not going to work. We'll submit our information according to the way we see it, and you guys are going to have to sort it out. And that carries on right across every single supply chain today. And there's loads of compromised information and sort of variances that people try and resolve. And it makes it terribly, terribly difficult to deal with. So anyone who tells you they have complete visibility across their supply chain is essentially fantasy land. They may believe it in some cases because their technology teams have told them, or their information systems partners have told them this, but it's not true. With Origin Trail and the technology that Origin Trail are working with in terms of decentralization, blockchain-based technologies that can scale massively, even though the performance still leaves a lot to be desired. That is improving, and this notion that you can decentralize this stuff in a coherent way and link it together in the same way that social networks link information. So these graph technologies, graph databases, that's the only way you have a hope in hell of trying to resolve this. So ultimately, you will end up, how long in the future, I have no idea, and what form it will take, I have no idea of that either. But this notion that you can have very, very, very large networks of knowledge supporting very extensive supply chains is actually now looking like a reality, and it didn't before. So that's really what I think about this and why I find it so interesting.
Yeah, and that's a very good summary from both, I think, and taking that into account, where we see this going. This is one example where bigger and more is better, because you also get into the law of network effects. So the more knowledge assets you have, the more paranets you have, the more connectivity you have, the more value the network and AI can extract. So we're really moving towards to have that level of connectivity that we see. We're really moving towards that $1 trillion sorry, not $1 trillion, but a trillion knowledge assets mark that would really bring about also an autonomous knowledge graph. And how we get there, right? We talked about a lot of things today in terms of supply chains. We have several exciting solutions that we're all working on, also together with BSI and David. And we're introducing new concepts all the time, having it multimodal DRAG that enables better and better solutions, not only also with text, but also with images, charts, and whatnot. And of course, there are solutions that keep on rolling out that provide that volume or provide the knowledge assets that moves us toward that trillion knowledge asset mark. We have an international sports organization that is rolling out in the next weeks. We have a bunch of consortia that are being formed so international consortia that actually use paranets and then decentralized knowledge graph for various things, ranging from manufacturing to aviation to various different topics. So there's a lot of very cool things that are coming, that are already here. But it's going to be definitely exciting next couple of years, seeing all of this develop and seeing the number of knowledge assets grow, and seeing the value that the AI can combination with the decentralized knowledge graph and DRAG can actually bring to the table. And I'm sure what we're seeing today, what we talked about today, is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure even if in 2 months, if we go to revisit and listen to this podcast, we'll be surprised at the advancements, that how quickly the advancements using these concepts and solutions built on top of them are actually made. So I'm really excited, and towards the trillion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited listening to all of you speak. So thank you, David. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Yuri. Thank you, all three of you, for sharing your vast amounts of expertise and knowledge. And this has, for me personally, been a very, very informative episode. I've learned so much sitting here over the past hour. I hope that those listening live and those listening later find this episode to be just as valuable. And yeah, we'll see you back here in a month for the next episode of the OnTrac podcast. Thanks again to everybody.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.